talk about Kaynes. They've set out a top-line guidance for FY28 to 30. Are they all set to achieve the 2 billion revenue mark or not? Let me welcome on board Jairam Sampath, whole-time director and CFO at Kaynes Technology, joining in on the show right now. Jairam, great to have you today in ET. Thank you so much for your time. Just wanted to understand, the guidance then that you've, put this target of $1 billion in revenues by FY28, 2 billion by FY30. What gives this kind of optimism?
Yeah, so this is part of the early growth phase of any company. And since we are reasonably sized or reasonably smaller sized company right now in terms of revenues, I think this kind of a growth rate is not unexpected for companies which are doing well. So, and also it is riding with the wave of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Plus, on ground, we see lots of traction in terms of order book growth and also the general performance in terms of profitability, etc., seem to be holding up. So we don't see any major hurdles to getting this crossing the $1 billion in FY28 sometime early in terms of 12-month trailing, as well as getting beyond this $2 billion mark in FY30. And we have two new businesses to support us. So we are pretty confident that from various angles, this particular target is supported,
Hi, Jairam. This is Harsh here. Trying to get a sense, how much of this revenue comes from export as an opportunity, or are you going to continue to target domestic as the largest chunk of your business? Domestic currently is, or rather export is single digit for you in terms of revenue mix for viewer perspective. Does that change as you scale?
Yeah, as we scale, a couple of qualitative changes happen in our portfolio. One is export. The exports out of India go up, maybe 10 becomes 20% or so. In addition to that, we start getting in the geography sales from the North America geography to begin with. That would, I estimate, by FY30 will be about 15% of our total turnover. So from this perspective, the export and export denominated sale in the consolidated number will be excess of 30%. And if you were to add the let's say the semiconductor business and so on. So there'd be a fair bit of exports there because the supply chain integration happens outside of India. So technically they get exported. Yes. So going forward, at least next, let's say 5 years time frame, you would see a constant increase in export or foreign denominated sale, happening. And of course, there is a competing Indian market too. And I think that is also getting a fillip with government refocusing its attention to the infrastructure development in terms of rail networks and many other things, the telecom and the defense and all other various spheres, which have so far not really got the charge that it requires. So I think going forward, you could probably look at by the end of this year and then the entire FY27 perhaps would be dedicated towards government's push in these sectors. And that will also add the necessary, let's say, amount of demand-supply gap to our portfolio. And then, of course, then we can a tad more confident about achieving all the parameters of our growth.
Right. And give us a sense, Jairam, is that where you are also going to capture, or is that where margin upside also gets captured? Is it because of export? And how competitive is it out there in the global marketplace? I'm trying to understand certainty on that margin number. You've breached
Sure.
the 15% now. You've guided 16. You're likely going to do 16 plus by end of this year. I'm trying to understand where that confidence is coming from and whether that's sustainable.
Yeah. So the source of growth of profitability depends on a few things. One is the portfolio in the sense that if you do a certain sectors a little more than certain other sectors in terms of the relative composition, then we end up doing more growth. You're right. The margins in outside geographies are larger than they are in India. The confidence comes from the fact that there are not many manufacturers who do small volume and high-tech production. And the third source of margin is also new production, new technologies. So, for instance, our new projects like the PC board, we are doing the HDI and the multi-layer and maybe flex PCBs and so on. So the closer you are to the leading edge technology and closer you are to the higher tech products, the margins is also higher. And closer you are to demand supply gap, of course, margin also is higher. So from all of these perspectives, we think that already we have identified sources of, let's say, increase in profitability beyond whatever we are doing currently. So they also, the other sources, I have listed three, the other sources, of course, backward integration, which lets us retain profits within the company. So backward integration into components which are widely used in our production. So that is another one which adds the margin. And finally, the quantum of design that we do, that is ODM, which will also add significant. So there are 5 factors that are all going actually in favor of the margin expansion over the next, let's say, near term, let's say 5 years time frame or so. So I am pretty confident that the margin accretion will continue to happen.
Right. Jairam, I was just looking at all your individual segments. While right now industrials is at the maximum weightage and contributes around 40% to your top line. In the run-up to FY30, given that all the segments that you operate in have significant tailwinds attached to them, what's the likelihood that some of the other segments would be bigger revenue contributors than industrials?
I guess head-to-head, let me put it this way. As on today, whatever strength these individual segments hold, they'll continue to be held. And they also will tend to grow at similar levels as the company's overall growth rate. But then other segments which are likely to come in and then, let's say, quote unquote, snatch some portion of our revenues from the other segments are maybe the railway segment, the defense and aerospace segment, and outer space segment, telecom, and those kinds of areas, and some of the newer segments like drones and all that. So we don't know how exactly that will pan out, but I'm sure they will also be considered as an IT for that matter. So I would say that, a tad lower percentage of composition of the industrial segment, but then fully compensated by some of the other segments which have not been doing too well compared to our expectations, like the railways or aerospace and outer space and defense or telecom or IT for that matter. So I would say it's plus minus. Maybe industrial in terms of our total composition, industrial will be maybe 5% lower than what it is today, and then the other segments will get or 6% lower, and other segments will get 2% each or something like that. So this only shows the relative growth potential over the next 5 years time frame, and this would probably settle similar to what we used to have earlier on, which is like about 26-27% in automotive, industrial, and electric vehicles would be at about completely at about 42-44%. And then, of course, railway is about 15%, your aerospace about 10-12% of total revenues. And of course, IT, IoT, etc., will be about 12%. And then remaining would be in medical and some of the other newer areas that come in. So this is how we look at, I think, next 5 years time frame, the revenue would kind of split up as.
Jairam, how should one look at the huge spike in receivables that we've seen? Does that unwind fairly quickly, or is that normal course of business for you? And that has kept pressure on working capital requirements. So trying to get a sense of the unwind there.
Sure. Yeah, I get the point. See, fundamentally, there are 2 parts to it. One is, like you said, the consequence of growth. So obviously, typically, if the terms with the customers don't improve, then 1 quarter of last quarter, especially the last quarter, will remain as receivables at the end of the quarter. What we are trying to do is all the large customers that we are onboarding, we are working with their supply chain teams and getting into supply chain finance, which is outside our books and without recourse to us. So that is going to take away a burden of about 10-15%, 20% of our total receivables. Plus, also there are certain older ones which we have worked to, and we have demonstrated that in the first half. A small number has been done, like discounting off the books, and then maybe by the end of this year we complete that too. So that is as far as the receivable burden is concerned. And of course, inventories are also the silent, let's say, burden on working capital. So we are trying to work with suppliers so that we can get something like a just-in-time setup for at least those products where there is a certainty of scheduling, some corporate guarantee from our side. so that between two of them, we can reduce the net working capital from whatever is 100 plus days to about 70 days or so in the medium term. And then later on, of course, we can do a better job once the scaling up happens, because what happens is while you scale up, the inventories and receivables don't go up proportionately. So you do get some scaling benefits there, provided we are able to implement all our policies that we have now decided to implement. So let me put it this way: there are some old items which we are dealing with it this year, and then systemic items we are now making systemic corrections in our way in which we deal with our suppliers and customers, so that it's a win-win across the board for everybody, without burdening our supply chain too much.
Right. Okay, Jairam, great to have you on the show today, and thank you once again for your time.